I'm going to go ahead and get started by just saying that today's session is interactive in the sense that we're not using any fancy technology for this one like we have in the past sessions. We're just going to use paper and pen. We need at least 2 pieces of paper. So if everyone, while we're waiting, grab 2 pieces of paper and some type of writing utensil. If you want to be really fancy and you happen to have Post-its or like those little tiny Post-its, then you can work. Oh, there you go, Gwen. You could even use Post-its. But we're gonna just
I have 3 sizes.
There you go. Use the small ones if you've got the small ones.
The little ones, all right.
Because we're gonna, the small ones fit better on a piece of paper.
Okay.
I'll also say, just in getting started, just a few housekeeping things, that the session is recorded. So I'm going to read this statement right here that we are recording the session so that we can share it with all registered attendees and for those who could not participate in the conference today. So if you do not wish to be recorded, please just keep your video turned off and or continue to mute your microphone. If you turn on your video and or your microphone, you are consenting to be recorded. So thank you for that. Today's session is a maker's lab. We're going to be kind of writing and creating some things today, hence the paper and pen and some Post-its if you have them. And we're specifically talking about designing and measuring transformational outcomes. Now, let me first just introduce my team. So some of you have already seen us or met us from other sessions. My name is Matt Strock. I'm an instructional designer. I'm also accompanied today by Alyssa Moon, Jef Fisher, Megan Hess, and then Alex is actually in the Air Force and he is out saving our airspace right now and protecting us. So he's not going to be in this session. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I want you to just take a few minutes, just about 2 minutes, and I want you to reflect on a time where you experienced transformational learning. Now, we are not defining transformational learning yet, or transformational outcomes. I want you to, just based on your own experience, interpret that statement. What is transformational learning to you? And I want you to reflect on a time where you really experienced a learning situation that was transformational. Just take about a minute or two just to ponder on that. Now what I want you to do is we're actually going to try to define it together. So based on your experience, how would you define a transformational outcome? Because that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So thinking about your experience, I'm not looking for a specific answer here. How would you define a transformational outcome? And take a minute to either jot it down on your paper or you can even write it in the chat. This is something that we're going to share. Okay, so as you're typing those in, is anyone willing to just unmute themselves and kind of speak up? How would you define it based on your experience?
I can share. It's Eva from Merced State. I think for me, transformational outcome is when I learned something that I want to go out and apply right away, like, go do it.
I love that, Eva. Like, that's so true. It's something that you're like, it's almost inspiring in the sense that you want to be like, oh, this is something I can use. This is something I can change in what I currently do. I love that. Thank you. Anyone else? I'm seeing a lot of good ones in the chat, which I'll bring up in a minute, but anybody willing to just share? Okay, I assume most of you see the ones in the chat there. If I were to pick out some themes here, what I'm seeing is that there's a change in the way we think or do something, change in perception. I love the example of the shrinking of the classroom. Changes the way we understand the world around us, right? So it's a shift in the way that we think and do things. And that's absolutely right. And that's kind of what we're focusing on today, is how do we design transformational outcomes and actually design instruction to help our students achieve that transformation, that change in the way they think and do things. There is a quote that I really like about kind of just design in general. And I want to start with, before I get into the objectives of what we're trying to achieve today, kind of the difference between outcomes and transformation. We're using them together, transformational outcomes. But typically in education, when we use the term outcomes, we're talking about what we want our students to do in the end. What is the end result that they are capable of doing something? And it could be something that's a change, right? Hopefully it is, that they weren't able to do it before. But we're going to focus today more on the thinking aspect of the transformation. There's like I said, a quote that I like, that essentially all organizations are perfectly designed for the results they get. Essentially, when we want a specific change, we have to design instruction in a way to achieve that change, to achieve that shift, or tweak how someone perceives something. I would probably rewrite this to even say all classrooms are perfectly designed for the results they get. That if we want to help our students change the way they think about something, we have to design it that way. It starts with design. And that's what I personally love about instructional design. And that's why I got into this field. I want to start out talking about the brain a little bit, and then we'll get into the objectives and what we're trying to do today. So each part of the brain has various functions, and they're all interconnected with other parts. And this part that you see here that's highlighted, this part of the brain, informs action. So it's what's influenced by other thinking parts. When you care about something, if it really matters to you, then it follows a specific pattern that influences your actions. And it really starts with how you think and perceive information. And it goes in kind of this pattern. Now, this is very quick how this happens. It's synapses are happening in milliseconds or micromilliseconds, and there's neural connections and pathways happening. But it starts where the one is in your thinking. So if we want to influence the way someone behaves and the way they do something, we have to start with how they think about that action. And that's really, from my perspective, what it is to design a transformation. It's starting with their thinking. So getting into the first objective is really the real task of education, from my perspective, is supporting people to think differently in order to do things differently. Okay. So the first objective is really just helping you write a transformation specifically focused on a change in thinking, which may be different than when we specifically talk about outcomes. It's usually the do part, right? We talk about that often. But today it's going to focus on the thinking aspect. We are going to also focus on the doing, and I'll kind of divide the transformation between thinking and doing when we get to actually writing it. And then discuss the criteria by which you can assess or measure a successful transformation. In the process of doing both of these, you'll actually create a short curriculum plan using what's called the clothesline method. And we're not going to do it very deeply. It's just going to be a brief kind of overview of some basics of the clothesline method. We would go much deeper if we were actually focusing on this detail. But you'll just have a little bit of a semblance of what it is. And then throughout the process as well, you'll write some objectives that are aligned to that transformation. Okay, so that's kind of the end goal today, what we're trying to achieve. So let me first kind of introduce the clothesline method, because this is the process that we're going to use to identify the transformation. Essentially, the clothesline method is a curriculum design method where you start with identifying where your students or your learners are at. And this might be, depicting they are, undergrad students, freshmen, who've never taken this kind of course before. They have no knowledge of it, versus grad students who have a lot of foundational knowledge and depth of understanding, and I want them to be able to be more creative and so on. So it's trying to understand where your students or your learners are. So we're going to start with that. And then it's looking at the transformation. And this is elements of backward design. So understanding where your students are and where your audience is at, and then going directly to the end goal. And then working backwards from there, identifying what's your transformation. What is it that you want them to get out of the course? And then bringing it into what are all the different elements that they need to be able to achieve that transformation. Ideally, you're going to break those down even further. We are not going to go to this level today, but you would then kind of have something that looks like this in the end, a curriculum map that outlines all the different pieces that students or learners would need to do in order to achieve that transformation successfully. And then all the details broken down as well. Okay, so on your first piece of paper, so you should have 2 pieces of paper. I want you to create a clothesline. Now you do not have to actually literally draw the lines if you don't want to, but I do want you to write on the left side where they are, so where your learners are starting. And if you teach multiple classes, like Gwen, I know you teach different levels of classes, just pick one. Or it could even be the instructors you work with or something. And I want you to take just a couple minutes and just write down and try to describe where your learners or your students are at and the typical group that you work with. You might just write down some bullet points of, first year students or graduate students or new staff or whatever it may be. Oh yeah, Alyssa brought up in the chat, if you were in the empathy session before, this is like a perfect place of where we would put that, is where your students are at, really trying to understand them from that perspective more deeply. Thank you, Alyssa. Okay, so I'm going to use an example of first-year culinary students because Megan Hess, one of our instructional designers, had brought up this idea last year to do a PB&J 101. And so we're going to use this same example because I really liked it and I think it fits for what we're doing here. So the example I'm showing you is using the same idea. So I'm assuming that I'm teaching first-year culinary students, and my course is Peanut Butter and Jelly Sandwich 101. Okay. Now let's get down to the transformation. Okay, because this is what we're really going to focus on today. And so I'm going to break down this transformation into 2 segments or two aspects, which I've already mentioned. The first is the thinking part. What do we want them to think? How do we want them to think differently or transform in the way that they're thinking? And what do we want them to be able to do in the end? So what I'm going to have you do on your second piece of paper is you're going to create a sheet that looks like this. On the left side, it says think. On the right side, it says do. And you're going to draw a line down the middle. And what we're going to do on the left side here, actually on both sides, you're going to create a concept map. So on the left side, we're going to create a concept map, which looks something similar to this. And on the right side, a little bit different of a concept map, but still a type of concept map. Okay. And both of these concept maps will then inform what we're doing on the other piece of paper, the actual clothesline method. This is where it might be helpful to use little Post-its. So instead of drawing it or writing it in circles, if you have little Post-its, each circle could be a different Post-it because you might move them around or move them from one paper to the next. So it might just save you some time if you're someone who has Post-its available. All right, so we're going to focus on this first one, the thinking part of transformation. I have found that I've talked to educators at all levels, from kindergarten teachers to graduate professors, and I often have similar conversations where I ask them, what is it that you want your students to get out of the course that you're teaching? And they'll tell me their outcome, they'll tell me some objectives, they'll kind of explain, and I say, no, but really, what is it you want them to get out of it? If you really were to consider your course and what it is you're teaching, 5 years from now, I want you to assume that you have a student come back or you have an employee come back to you and they say, you had this impact on me in this way. What would that be? What's the change that you were able to create in them, in the way that they think about what they do? So that's really what we're talking about when we say the thinking transformation. So I put this question up here, and I really want you to think beyond just the curriculum, beyond even the traditional outcomes that you might have in mind. If you had someone come back to you 5 years from now, what would they get out of the learning experience that you created? Okay. And I'm using the PB&J example. So they're taking PB&J 101, right? They're culinary students, so they know a little bit about cooking. They may be taking some courses on some basics. And now they're in this peanut butter and jam class, and they're like, what is this all about? I say, you know what? The transformation, though, that I really want in this course is I want to expand your perception of the culinary possibilities of all ingredients. It has nothing to do with the PB&J. It's about how you think about ingredients. Okay? It's expanding their perception as they come into this course. Okay? That's the transformation I'm shooting for. Now, some other examples, you might have a course where you just want your students to be more empathetic or empathic. You want to change how they think about other people. If you were in the keynote session, he talked a lot about deficit and anti-deficit. Maybe that's a perception change that you want to create in your students or your learners or your staff. So I want you to take just a couple minutes. And again, we're looking at the left side of your paper for the transformation side where it says think. You're going to create a concept map and try to brainstorm what would be a transformation that you want in the people you're leading or teaching. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this. Now, as you're doing it, I'm going to give you a caveat because this takes me some time to develop, to really think it through. And I'm only giving you a few minutes. So some of you may kind of struggle to really come up with something, and that's okay. And we're just trying to get some thoughts down. I'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes to do this. Okay, as you wrap up, and my timer is about to go off here, let me turn it off. Anybody willing to share? Now, I know I'm putting you on the spot. Typically, I would do a think, pair, share. It's a little slower to do this virtually, a think, pair, share, so I'm going to skip right to just sharing. Anybody willing to share their transformation? I'm not looking for specific answers, just if you're willing to put it out there.
Mine is pretty simple. Just move from I can't to I can.
Oh, I love that one. That's such a good. You say it's simple, but realistically, how easy is that to do, right? That's pretty complex. You're totally shifting their mindset. But that is the transformation. Absolutely. What a great example. Anyone else?
I can share, and I'm thinking about, let's say, our first year students that come to campus, to orientation, and we ask, we try to engage them in multicultural mindedness, or just even using inclusive language. We use pronouns, and some students really don't know how to. So I'm like, how do we change the thinking so the students appreciate the need to use gender inclusive language and appreciate the stories of people for whom that is important to have that language used, and kind of the concept of language and power and that relationship. So kind of different levels of having empathy for people who are different from self and wanting to meet people from other perspectives, other backgrounds. And understanding that my perspective is one, it's not dominant, it shouldn't be, and everybody else's is equally valid. So those were some of the things that I kind of jotted down as far as what I would want them to be transforming their thinking to.
Absolutely. That is such a good example as well. I'm very partial to that one because I taught English for many years. And my transformation at the end of every year was empathy. I just wanted my students to have more empathy for others, and to help break down different prejudices they might have. I absolutely love that because you're talking about changing the way that they see themselves and others, which is such a great transformation. So now what I want you to do is this is where, if you're not familiar with the concept mapping, essentially we start with this circle in the middle, and you're going to branch out and really consider what are the kind of skills or habits or attitudes that someone would emulate or demonstrate that has made this transformation. So if someone's actually come to you 5 years from now and said, you changed me from being, a different mindset. I used to think this way, and now I think this way. It's all because of you. What are some things that you could see that would demonstrate that they're thinking that way? So this is kind of a difficult question, but I want you to try to create a concept map with this. So I'll show you an example with the PB&J. The ability to expand the perception of culinary possibilities, they need to be able to experiment with different applications of ingredients in general, right? And so that's way that they would show me that they're starting to get to this transformation. But even further than that, that they actually show or demonstrate creativity through unique uses of ingredients. They're really starting to show that they perceive things differently. but they can also justify their decisions. They can defend creative decisions and say, well, this is why I chose it this way. I'm pulling from this information. I'm pulling from this over here. But you might also think of the fact that they still need some basic foundational understanding. For example, they need to understand how to make every ingredient from scratch. If I really want to change how they think about ingredients in general, they need to understand those ingredients. So when we talk about PB&J, they should probably learn how to make bread, peanut butter, and jam. Okay, so these are just a few that I might kind of break out that would show me that they're starting to get to that transformation, that they're thinking differently. So I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 minutes. Create a concept map. Okay, as you finish up your thoughts, I want you now to choose one of the circles. Okay, so not the main transformation, but one of the circles, kind of the outline circles that connect from it. And I want you just to think to yourself, and you can write this down. It might help to write it down. How would you assess it? How would you measure this? That the students are really kind of reaching that transformation. Again, you're looking for the transformation. So you're not just assessing that they're doing the tasks successfully, but how has it changed the way they think? And so if we focus on this one here, experiment with different applications of ingredients. I might put them in a task. This is a culinary class. I might give them a task where they have to make a PB&J, but I give them very specific restrictions. Maybe someone has a peanut butter allergy. Maybe they can't use bread, right? But they have to somehow figure out how to experiment. And I'm looking at how their perception of the ingredients is changing. That's what I'm looking for. Again, it's back to that transformation. Just take a minute. If it helps to write it down, you can, or just think about it. How would you assess just one? And how would it inform the transformation you've chosen? Okay, as you finish up, I'm going to put you in breakout rooms for about 6 or 7 minutes. And you're just going to share specifically what your transformation is and the thing that you chose and how you would assess it. Okay, how would you assess the transformation? I'm going to hop in and out and just kind of listen. So you'll probably all see me, but it's going to be about 6 minutes. All right, welcome back. Apologize for the awkward getting sucked out of those breakout rooms. Anybody willing to share? I think we have time to maybe 2 people share.
I can go, Matt, if you want me to still. Okay, so just to show you my rabbit hole, it was how school will help achieve their goals, meaning my students. My role is I'm at a community college, and they often come in very desperate spaces, and they want to elevate or move up in the world, but they're not sure. So helping them figure out how that works. And then the transformation would be that they can versus the can't mindset. And then the areas that I was like, how might I know this, that it's happening, is their level of motivation, number of classes, their participation level, questions asked, and maybe the change in their goals. And so when I pull the bubble to say, how would I assess? I chose to pull out questions asked. And so I would assess, or one of the ways would be is looking at a comparison maybe of the types of questions that they're asking, as well as the quality of questions, as well as their timing of their questions. And there we have it. That's what I did.
I asked her to share it because I love that one. It's so, because it very clearly shows you what needs to be taught too. If I want to see them asking questions, I need to teach them how to ask questions.
Yes,
If
absolutely.
I want to see, right? I mean, the transformation tells us what we need to teach as well. And that's what I loved about your example, is it's so specific. You go from that mindset, that shift in how they think, and you're drawing it down to what actually needs to be taught and how would you assess it. And that's what's so great about using this kind of map is you're aligning everything together. Such a great example. All right. So you shared the transformation, but now kind of what we talked about with Lasana's example, I'm going to use the peanut butter and jam thing. If I want to expand the perception of possibilities, now I'm going to lay that out. That's going to give me some specific objectives that I need to actually teach and assess. And so the great thing about this whole process of using this clothesline method is it helps you identify what you really want your students to get out of the course, but also what you need to teach to help them achieve it and be successful in it. Hold on, I'm trying to pull up. I lost the WebEx screen here for a minute. I also want to point out this. If you change the transformation, so instead of being the example that I gave before, again, the peanut butter and jam class, where I wanted to change their perception of ingredients, now I want them to empathize with potential customers. So I'm assuming they're all going to go into restaurants, and I want them to understand where customers are coming from. What I'm actually identifying in the concept map is going to be very different, and those objectives are going to change drastically. I might have some that are similar, but identifying varying needs and desires of potential customers now becomes the focus. I also need to teach them to create and use ingredients in alternate ways. So maybe if someone's allergic to peanut butter or has a gluten allergy or has any type of dietary restrictions, I need to be able to adapt based on their needs. And that's what I'm going to be teaching. So when I change the transformation, it changes also what I teach, and it informs what I'm going to teach and assess. So now let's go to the other side of transformation, the doing part. And this is what I think most people do fairly well when we talk about outcomes. This is what often they focus on. And so we're going to create another concept map, again, on the other side of the page. So we started with think, now we're going to do. And I want you to start out with a circle again and consider the same kind of scenario. 5 years from now, how do you envision students using what they have learned? And so for me, as a peanut butter and jam connoisseur, someone who loves a deliciously toasted peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I want them to be able to open a food truck. Not just any food truck, a PB&J food truck, but it could be any food truck for them, right? So that's my main focus, that I want them to learn to do something, is to open a PB&J food truck, or sorry, open a food truck. So I want you to think just for a minute or 2 minutes, what is it you want them to do in the end? And this gets to kind of like the main task that you might have them try to do as well. When you go into designing things like authentic performance assessments, which we're not going to go into too much here. So I want you just to take about 2 minutes. What is it you want them to do in the end? So first we start thinking and doing. Go ahead. Okay, as you finish up, we're going to go on to the next phase. And again, you're creating a concept map. I want you to now think of, if the task that I'm going for, that I want them to do, is be able to open up their own food truck, or even their own restaurant for that matter. What are the 3 things that they have to be able to do in order to open a food truck or open a restaurant? So now I'm going to create a concept map from that. Now it could be more than 3. I'm only going to focus on 3 for here, but you might actually have other ideas that you want to write down, and that's fine too. So my top 3 would probably be, they need to create a business plan. They need to create some type of menu, and they need to create a marketing plan. Now you notice that has nothing to do with cooking. My main tasks here are tied to the idea of specifically opening a restaurant or a food truck. So I'm going to give you a few minutes, just about 2 or 3 minutes, and create a concept map. Go further now. At least 3, but you can do more than that. Okay, like we did before, and we are going to share this in groups one more time. I want you to choose just one of your circles. How would you assess it and measure success? And how would this inform your main transformation of being able to do the main task here? So for me, it's opening a food truck. So how would I assess creating a business plan? And how does that inform opening a food truck or a restaurant? I'll give you about 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, I know you're probably not done, but just for the sake of time, we're going to move on to just sharing with whatever you have so far. So in small groups again, I'm going to put you in the same groups. Share your doing transformation now and how you would assess it. And how would you assess the piece that you chose and how that informs the transformation? I'm going to put you in groups. Oh, I think I can do it when I'm sharing, but I didn't see it. And I'm going to give you a little less time this time. So if we don't get through everybody, that's okay. But I want to make sure we end on time. So I'll give you about 4 minutes or so. Well, welcome back, everybody. Anybody willing to share? We have time for maybe one.
It's such a lively group. I'll go ahead and just throw it out there. On the doing, I put complete the degree without thinking really about that, but yep, complete the degree. In my concept map bubbles, I said they need to understand their degree works. They need to understand their degree requirements. And then like actually know how to petition to graduate. Many of my students don't know how to do that. And they leave and they don't push the button and get their degree. How I would assess, definitely would flesh it out a little bit more, but how they are scheduling their classes, maybe how they're attending their classes, and then maybe a little bit about their appointment scheduling, like how they're connecting, how they're being consistent. So
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And what I love about that too, even though you started out thinking, oh, this is just a simple one, they need to complete their degree. Again, everything that you were able to elaborate on and break into with the concept map, again, tells you what you need to teach and what you need to help them with, and what you should assess to make sure that they're getting it effectively, to make sure that your instruction or your help or your guidance actually had the impact intended. I'm going to share my screen one last time to just kind of demonstrate what this would look like in the. We didn't spend a lot of time with the clothesline method just for the sake of time. But what you would do next essentially is take all those concepts that you created in the 2 concept maps and actually start to lay them out now in the clothesline method. And so what that would look like is I have the doing transformation, and I'm going to put all of these different objectives or specific things that I want them to be able to do in order to reach that transformation. But I'm also going to bring in this other transformation that I had about expanding the perception of the possibilities of ingredients, that had these 3 objectives, and I'm going to put them together. And this tells me essentially my curriculum map, what it is that I need to teach. I've got 2 main transformations here. I've got the thinking aspect and the doing together. And then I would need to kind of shift them around. That's why it's nice sometimes to do it with Post-its, because you might choose to scaffold it in different ways and move things around to where they might need certain concepts first to be able to do other concepts later on. And you're going to kind of weave them together. And that's the art of instructional design, really. Ultimately, you would elaborate on each of these and flesh out all the details, which again, we are not going into in this session today. But you go into, okay, now what skills are needed for this specific objective? What attitudes do I want to help them develop just for this objective? Are there specific activities or tasks that they can do, or knowledge and content that I know as the expert that would really help them? And then how can I formatively assess it as well? And you'll notice that throughout the whole process, you're considering assessment, and it informs the way you teach, but also how you're assessing and how they achieve those outcomes or the transformation. And in doing it this way, everything is aligned. It all comes back to that final transformation. And I know that when you teach this way, it really does have the impact that we want. And I talk to educators again at all levels, and they tell me that they teach because they want to do this. They want to have this impact. But then when we talk about what they're teaching, it's not having that impact. Again, it comes back to that quote I shared. Every organization or classroom is perfectly designed for the results it gets. So if we want a specific transformation, we have to design for it. And that's why something like this, the clothesline method, is really helpful for that. Just in closing, if you just reflect on this idea of transformational outcomes, and think about how it changes the way you teach or design instruction. And if anybody's willing to share as you're leaving, great. You can just throw it in the chat for me, because I'm curious as to, that's the transformation I'm shooting for with this session, and if it's actually had an impact at all of you. And I think this is the last session for today, so Alyssa should be putting in the chat a link. She's showing me she already did it, for the survey. And I think that's it. Unless anyone else has any final comments, you are welcome to go. Oh, and I'm trying to put together documentation for this process as well. It's not finished, but I'll hopefully have that in the next week that we can share.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Gwen. Thank you all.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you too. I think this was great, and I'm excited to be able to put those resources in with the rest of the conference resources, and just want to thank you all for all you did today.